Hey Wolfpack, it is finally Saturday, and tonight I'm bringing you 3 creepy driving horror stories. But first, today's sponsor is brought to you by Chat Stories. Chat Stories is a completely free app that you can use to read all sorts of different stories. There's already currently 10,000 downloads. There's multiple different selections such as fantasy, thriller, horror, and many more as well. And also too, when you're reading it, there's sound effects and pictures to get you much more immersed into the stories you're reading. I've recently started reading The Jungle, and it's very good, to be honest. The Cursed Ship isn't that bad either. I would highly recommend you check this out on Google Play Store. The link will be in the description below. Now, with that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares.
And that wraps up our countdown to the top 40 hits of the week. We'll be back with new chart toppers next Saturday. Until then.
I turn off the radio, taking a deep breath as I keep driving along the interstate, the headlamps keeping the dark of the night at bay. Outside, I pass a large, unrecognizable tree. A hooded guy standing underneath gave me a creepy smile as my car rolled forward. I tried to ignore it. A yawn builds within. I try to stifle it as tears begin to well in the corner of my eyes. Boredom silently sets in, with the dull hum of the engine taking a dominant role. Why did this have to happen? Things were going quite well, you see. The countryside wedding was a joyous affair, and my friend was over the moon. We'd all decided to let the day pass in festivities while reminiscing the good old college days. Halfway through the celebrations, however, fate took a toll on me. A single phone call changed my mood. The alcohol had drained along with blood from my face. Grandma had met with an incident suddenly. My car hits a speed bump, the jolt shaking me back to the present. I steady the car when a voice spills out from the radio.
How's it going, folks? Thank you for tuning in to 303 The Hits. Tonight, we will be having an endless run of the classics, and I assure you, you just won't be able to turn it down.
I abruptly turn off the radio, letting the silence wash over me. Cold sweat pricks my face, and I draw out a tissue from the glove box to wipe the sweat beads off. But the radio chimes back in on its own.
Now, what did I say? You just can't turn off your radio. Let's move on to the playlist to hit the right mood. Nothing says a dying grandmother better than...
Static. The voice simply trails off, leaving my heart stuck in my throat. How did it know? My eyes dart around the road, trying to grasp at any form of logic that my brain can muster. And then, I feel a cold breath, coming in heaves as if... Startled, I fumbled through my pockets and seeing my friend's name on it, answering the call. Bree, hi, hey, what's up?
Jay, how have you been holding up?
I'm fine, I think. I lied. Still on the road. There was a slight pause, and I could feel Bree's hesitation through the receiver.
It's been 7 hours since you left the wedding, Jay. How come you're still driving?
My blood freezes. I bring the car to a halt. What do you mean, 7 hours? It's hardly been, what, 3, 4 hours since I left? No response. I can hear her breathing down the line. Bree? Her breathing gets shallow. Bree, what's going on?
Welcome to 303, The Hits. How's Grandma?
I throw the phone off, but it bounces off the window and lands on the shotgun seat. A raspy laugh emanates from the receiver, and the radio static tunes in with a horrible imitation. Both voices rise in volume and pitch, filling my car with ear-splitting shrillness. I try to subdue it by blocking my ears. Tears roll down my face. I hastily open the door and walk out into the night. Silence engulfs me. I take huge gulps of the cold, crisp air as it pierces my throat. I look around, trying to find a place, any place where I could get help. But the looming trees sway listlessly in the lazy breeze. rustling and ignorant of my situation. I stay out for around 5 minutes, though I have no sense of time at this point, before braving to open the car. Nothing. The car idles as if nothing had happened, the engine punctuating the surroundings with its low rumble. I sit back inside, grab the phone, and stare at the call logs for a full minute. Bree never called. Was all that a hallucination? I senselessly look around for an explanation. The night doesn't seem to care at all. I disengage the handbrake, hit the accelerator, and ride back home. Unwillingly, my hand moves towards the radio dial.
And that wraps our countdown to the top 40 hits of the week. We'll be back with new chart toppers next week. Until then.
I turn off the radio, taking a deep breath as I keep driving along the interstate. The headlamps keeping the dark of the night at bay. Outside, I pass a large, unrecognizable tree. 2 hooded guys standing underneath gave me a creepy smile as my car rolled forward, and then it hit me. Before I could even process the likeness of the events, my car hits a speed bump, the jolt bringing my attention to the front. I steady my car when a voice spills out from the radio.
How's it going, folks? Thank you for tuning in to 303, The Hits. Tonight,
A horrible sensation takes over me. I feel a dull headache as nausea starts to grip my senses while the radio speaks out the same lines. This happened. I know it happened. I wasn't hallucinating. It's those guys under the tree, but the car is locked, and all I could do is drive forward. If I were to make a guess, I'd say it's been about 15 hours since I left the wedding. Sometime close to 22:30, but there has been no sunrise. I've been driving and halting the car at various points, only to see an endless stretch of road ahead. The radio is static. I just can't turn it off. My phone's clock has glitched. Google Maps show my location to be somewhere in western India, a whole ocean apart, clearly broken. The car isn't running out of fuel, or maybe the dial is broken as well. The internet refuses to answer my queries. Strangely, Reddit works, so here I am. Someone help me out of this hell. I can see the same tree in the distance, but I can't seem to get closer to it. The worst part, I cannot make a call, but I keep receiving one. I'm afraid to answer it. It's Grandma. I'm sorry I was so late getting in from the party last night. I ended up having to take care of Evan. I got him home and made sure he was okay before heading this way. I practiced several different iterations of that line on that drive home. I knew my parents wouldn't believe it, but I usually would get an A for effort and a light talking to if it wasn't too far past curfew. 2:21, the dash warned me. It was getting dangerously close to the too far past curfew. The light it cast filled the interior of my 93 white 2-door Lero with a dull green glow. I took a breath and leaned forward to straighten out my vision and leaned a little harder on the accelerator. It was dark that night on the 2-lane I-59. No moon, and I hadn't seen another car for miles. It was quiet too, only the hum of the engine droning on through a couple of layers of metal and plastic. I had the radio on earlier, but I killed it after dropping Evan off. This late at night, the only thing that played was crying classic country and 80s rock hits. I knew I was starting to fade, but I was only a couple of exits from being home. As I came up on a hill, I noticed lights spilling over the other lane across the median, indicating that I wasn't as alone on the interstate as I thought. I continued up the hill and kept my finger on my high beams, anticipating having to turn them off. I was honestly surprised that I topped the hill first until I noticed off in the distance that there was a car moving at a snail's pace. I dimmed my lights and slowed down slightly, almost as if in response. The white car came to a halt. That's weird, I thought. Who would come to a complete stop in the middle of the interstate? I slowed down even more as I got closer. Something was wrong. I was close enough at this point to see through the lights in my eyes that only the driver's side door was open and someone was standing in the middle of the road. He had my build and looked about my age. I was barely moving at this point, trying to determine what was going on. The man in the road looked back at his car, then began running in the second lane towards the median in my direction, screaming something and waving his hands in the air. Against my better judgment, I stopped to see what was going on. In the moment, I didn't think to pull over onto the shoulder or kill the engine. I just put the car in park in the middle of the interstate. Something was wrong. I thought he needed help. I flung my door open and tried to make out what he was saying. That's when he stopped in his tracks in the second lane and fell to his knees. I slowly started walking towards the man and started to call out when I saw it. Beginning to creep over the hill behind him was the high beams of an approaching vehicle. I cried out to him, trying to get his attention. He was still on his knees, but was clearly looking right in my direction. Crying, maybe? I was waving at him, trying to indicate that I needed to get out of the road. The lights finally topped the hill, originating from a huge semi-truck, clearly trying to make up time on his route home. The giant rig was headed directly towards the man. I waved several more times and yelled out, although he was looking in my direction. For some reason, he couldn't see me. I looked back at the car and realized that my lights must be blinding him from me. That's when I took off running in his direction. I was panicking at this point. I was yelling as loudly as I could, waving my hands in the air, anything I could do to get his attention. A semi-truck was maybe 300 yards from the man at this point, not slowing down. If I couldn't get his attention, he was going to die. I continued to run, sprinting faster than I ever had in my life, flailing my arms wildly in the air, shouting out loud at the absurd limit of my vocal cords. I was close enough now to see that the man was crying, staring in my direction but not seeing me. The lights around him grew brighter and brighter as the 18-wheeler grew closer and closer. Suddenly, the man looked down at something in front of him, examining it intently. He leaned over and spilled his guts, then slowly raised his head and his gaze directly at me, this time seeing me. His silhouette grew smaller and smaller as the bright light around him closed in. And then, I'll never forget what I saw. It stopped me in my tracks, and I fell to my knees. Where the man was kneeling just seconds prior was now a giant red mist settling into a pool on the pavement. I vaguely heard the sound, the sporadic thuds of what I assume were flesh falling to the ground. Pieces of this man were raining down around me, into the median and onto both lanes of the I-59. I couldn't believe what just happened, what I just witnessed. I just kept staring at the spot where the man was previously kneeling, in a total state of shock. I began sobbing, slowly at first, then uncontrollably. The image of the man getting pulverized by an 18-wheeler was on an infinite loop in my head, and I couldn't make it stop. I grabbed my head, crying so hard I could barely breathe, totally unable to take my eyes off of that spot. In my shock, I thought that I heard something, someone yelling at me. I thought that I could see the light illuminating around me in my peripheral, but I couldn't stop staring at that spot, seeing that man explode as a 40-ton semi-truck ripped through his body, evaporating him into a red mist and sending pieces of him cascading around me. The sound grew louder, and the light grew brighter, but nothing mattered. I just continued to stare at that spot. I heard one more thud in front of me, and what I saw demanded all of my attention. Oh God, it was the man's head. It didn't bounce. It thudded once and rolled a little bit, split in spots around the perimeter like a dropped watermelon. It was directly in front of me. The eyes were what gave it away. The mutilated face in front of me was my own. I couldn't process what was happening. Without even a feeling of nausea, I leaned over and vomited hard. The light around me was blinding at this point, and the voice yelling was now comprehensible, and I understood what was happening. Slowly, I raised my head in the direction of my own voice coming from across the median, looked myself dead in the eyes, and braced myself for what was about to happen. That was the last thing that I remember. I woke up in the hospital several weeks later. I didn't bother telling anyone exactly what happened. I'm sure there was a decent amount of alcohol content in my blood system, and no one would believe me anyways. I don't know why I'm still alive. I shouldn't be. Every bone in my body broke, and I had barely begun the healing process. I can't sleep. All I can see is that man, me, getting split in half and splattered all over the interstate. If I try to close my eyes, I relive every moment of that night over again. What's worse is I've had several near-death experiences since then. Nothing like that night, but enough to know that it's still coming for me. I'm not supposed to be alive. It will have to correct itself eventually, won't it? This story, memory, or whatever you prefer to call it, has been with me for a while. I haven't talked to many people about it before, and even fewer actually believe me. I know what I saw that night, and it has changed me. Never again am I driving at night. I was catching a ferry at 7:30 a.m. that morning, and with the length of the drive I had ahead of me, I figured I would start early. At midnight, the same night, I went out to the car, made sure everything looked good with it, that I had everything packed, the relatively usual stuff. An hour later, I was on the road. The first stretch was fine, well-lit roads, some traffic, occasionally passing through towns and villages, even cities. I was well rested, well stocked, and everything seemed to be ready for the night's drive. My first stop was about an hour, maybe a little more into the drive. Stretch my legs, visit the toilet, then get back on the road was the plan. I did the routine and went back to the car. Even already, something felt off. But something always feels off. Like the feeling you have forgotten something at home, but you don't know what. Not wasting any more time and forgetting it, I continued down the road. 3 hours remained, if I were to only drive, and have no brakes, nor accidents. The road slowly became darker. Any traffic I had seen earlier was replaced by the occasional truck blaring by, and I realized I started getting into more remote areas. It wasn't my first time driving the stretch, so nothing weird, but nonetheless. Even so, out of nowhere, I saw a pair of headlights pop up in my mirrors. White headlights, red front fog lights, which I'm not even sure is legal. Compared to the very little traffic I had seen, I was almost pleasantly surprised to see I wasn't the only one out there. Suddenly, I noticed something crucial. The music in my own car had stopped. Do you realize how boring driving quickly becomes without music and no one to talk to? I briefly looked at my phone, realizing the playlist had simply ended. I hit play, and on it went again. At this point, I had expected the car to catch up to me. He seemed to be coming quite fast, but the car was nowhere in sight. I figured he may have turned in somewhere, so I kept going. My second stop was coming up, a little more than an hour from the previous one, this time at a 24-hour gas station. Similar routine, get out, stretch my legs, take a piss. This time, I also went to sit down with a coffee before moving on once again. Just before returning to my car, I saw the car pull into the parking lot that I had seen earlier, with red front fog lights. They park relatively close to my car, then walk up to it, peek into the driver's seat, then go back to their own car and shoot off. Something must have spooked them, or made them suddenly be in a huge hurry. Cautiously, I went out and looked around, on top and under my car. Nothing weird, so I moved on. Quite soon, I started getting away from the remote areas, into some kind of civilization once again. Traffic started increasing very slowly, but surely. Road got more lit up, all the signs you want to see. But there was something else. A car parked at a bus stop just ahead. Not thinking much of it, I went by it, and noticed something very similar about it. Red fog lights. Just as I passed it, they got into gear and started following me. This time, they didn't disappear. They followed me, each turn I took. They were always behind me, which quickly started spooking me. But I did feel some kind of safety in my door locks, if I ever had to stop next to them, which is exactly what happened. We both pulled up to a junction in a town just before the harbor city I was going to. We were waiting on traffic lights to turn green, when I see the driver door on the car behind me open. I see someone start to step out of the vehicle. carrying something with moderate size, something like a club, bat, or similar. I locked my doors, made sure the windows were closed all the way, as the dark figure came closer to my car. Just as I would have turned around to get a good look at him, I see the traffic light turn green. Having the car already in gear, I floor it, leaving him behind me in a hurry. Eventually, I reached the harbor city where the ferry would stop in some time. At this point, the car had disappeared once again. Most likely expected me to stop again, but I didn't, and decided to go elsewhere. The next day, the first thing I do is check several online newspapers. They were all warning the general population in the area for the dangerous individual, though with no exact reason why. Last seen driving an older car with red front fog lights.
Thanks for watching, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your story, my email and subreddit will be in the description below. And also, if you're not subscribed, please do if you want. And don't forget to like and comment as well. Have beautiful nightmares. And I will see you next time.